He had billions in the bank, but not a single memory of his own child. The morning he answered that call, he thought it was just another interruption, another problem to solve. But within hours, he would be standing in a hospital hallway, staring into the eyes of an 8-year-old girl who had been waiting her whole life for him. And the worst part? She already knew him, even though he had never been there. If stories like this touch your heart, take a moment to subscribe. Because sometimes, the stories we hear are the ones we were meant to feel. Christopher Hale was a man who never missed a call, unless it didn't matter. That morning in Chicago, the wind cut through the streets like a blade, sharp and unforgiving. He stood beside his black luxury sedan, adjusting his cufflinks, already thinking 3 steps ahead of his next meeting. $1,000,000 decisions were waiting for him. Investors, contracts, power. Then his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. Almost. Something in his chest tightened, just for a second, like a quiet whisper telling him this wasn't random. He answered. Christopher Hale speaking. There was a pause. Then a calm, professional voice. Mr. Hale, this is Northwestern Memorial Hospital. We need you to come in immediately. He frowned, already annoyed. I have a board meeting in an hour. What is this regarding? Another pause. He could hear it now, something heavy behind the words. A patient requested you personally before emergency surgery. She insisted. Christopher's grip tightened around the phone. Who is the patient? Hannah Miller. For a moment, the world went silent. That name didn't belong in his life anymore. It belonged to a different time, a different version of him. Before the wealth, before the power, before he became a man who measured everything in numbers. That must be a mistake, he said, but his voice wasn't as strong as usual. No, sir. She provided your personal number. She said, it's a matter of life and death. Life and death. Christopher looked at his watch. Every second of his day was scheduled, controlled, predictable. But this wasn't. I'll be there in 40 minutes, he said. And just like that, without realizing it, he made the most important decision of his life. The drive felt longer than usual. Chicago's skyline rose around him like a kingdom he had built from nothing. Glass towers, steel, money, success. Everything he had ever wanted. And yet, for the first time in years, it felt empty. Hannah Miller. He hadn't said her name out loud in nearly a decade. She used to laugh like the world hadn't broken her yet. A freelance photographer with messy hair and a heart too big for the life she lived. They had met in Seattle. Fell fast. Fell hard. But Christopher had chosen ambition. She had chosen love. And somewhere between those choices, they lost each other. He thought she moved on. Just like he did. Or at least, that's what he told himself. When he stepped into the hospital, everything felt different. The air smelled of antiseptic and quiet fear. People moved slowly, carrying invisible pain on their shoulders. No one cared about money here. No one cared about status. Here, everyone was equal. Vulnerable. I'm Christopher Hale, he said at the front desk. I was called about Hannah Miller. The receptionist's expression changed instantly. Not impressed, not intimidated, just serious. We've been expecting you. That sentence hit harder than it should have. A nurse led him down a long hallway. The lights were too bright. The silence too loud. She's already in surgery, the nurse explained gently. It was urgent. Christopher frowned. I haven't seen her in 10 years. Why would she call me now? The nurse didn't answer directly. She said you were the only one who could help. Only one. That didn't make sense. Nothing about this made sense. They reached the surgical waiting area. "You can wait here," the nurse said. Christopher nodded, distracted, his mind racing through memories he had buried for years. And then he saw her. A small girl, no more than 8, sitting alone on a cold metal chair, her feet not even touching the floor. A pink backpack clutched tightly in her arms like it was the only thing holding her together. She wasn't crying. That was the strange part. She just looked alone. Deeply alone. Christopher slowed down. Something about her felt familiar. The way she sat. The way she stared at those operating room doors like her whole world was behind them. Then she looked at him. And in that moment, something shifted inside him. She stood up slowly and walked toward him. "Come." Careful. Like she had been waiting for this exact moment. She stopped right in front of him. "Are you Christopher Hale?" she asked. Her voice was soft, but steady. Christopher felt something hit his chest. Hard. "Yes," he said, lowering himself to her level. "I am." A pause. "And you are?" The girl tightened her grip on the backpack straps. "My name is Samantha," she said. Then she looked straight into his eyes, and said something that made his heart stop. "My mom said you would come." Christopher's breath caught in his throat. The words didn't just land, they echoed. "My mom said you would come." There was something in the way she said it. Not hope, not doubt, just certainty. As if she had never questioned it. As if, in her world, he was someone who showed up. Christopher swallowed, trying to steady himself. "Your mom. Hannah Miller." Samantha nodded. For a second, neither of them spoke. The quiet between them felt heavy, like something bigger was sitting there, waiting to be uncovered. She shifted her backpack slightly and reached inside. "I was supposed to give you these," she said. Her small hands pulled out 2 envelopes. Thick. Carefully sealed. She held them out to him, her fingers trembling just enough to betray how much this moment meant. Christopher hesitated, then took them. The paper felt heavier than it should have. "What is this?" he asked, his voice lower now. "She said you had to read them," Samantha replied. "Before anything else." Before anything else. Christopher glanced toward the double doors of the operating room. The red light above them still glowed, steady and cold. Then he looked back at the envelopes in his hands. One had his name written in familiar handwriting. Hannah's handwriting. That same soft looping style he hadn't seen in years, but somehow recognized instantly. His chest tightened. He opened the first envelope slowly. Inside was a letter. He didn't read it yet. Instead, almost instinctively, he reached for the second one. The paper inside slid out stiff and official. And the moment his eyes landed on it, everything inside him stopped. Birth certificate. His gaze dropped to the names. Child, Samantha Miller Hale. Father, Christopher Hale. It felt like the ground beneath him had shifted, like reality itself had cracked open. He stared at the page, his vision blurring slightly as his mind tried to catch up. No, this didn't make sense. He looked up at Samantha again. Really looked at her this time. Her eyes. There was something there. Something familiar. Something unsettling. The shape. The focus. The quiet way she observed everything around her. It hit him all at once. That wasn't coincidence. That was blood. His throat went dry. "You," he started, but the words wouldn't come. Samantha tilted her head slightly, watching him carefully. "Is everything okay?" That question. So simple, and yet it cut deeper than anything else. Christopher exhaled slowly, trying to hold himself together. "How old are you?" he asked. "I'm 8, she said. "I had my birthday 2 months ago." 8. His mind moved fast now. Counting. Backtracking. Seattle. That last summer. That last night. The timeline lined up perfectly. Too perfectly. A sharp wave of guilt hit him so hard it almost made him dizzy. 8 years. 8 years of her life. Gone. Moments he never saw. First steps. First words. First day of school. All of it gone. Because he had chosen something else. Because he had walked away. I didn't know, he whispered, more to himself than to her. Samantha sat back down in her chair, her legs swinging slightly above the floor. My mom said you might not, she said quietly. Christopher looked at her. She said you weren't a bad man, just a busy one. That hit harder than any accusation ever could. Busy. That was the word he had always used to justify everything. Busy building his empire. Busy becoming someone important. Busy, missing the only thing that actually mattered. He looked down at the letter still in his hand. His fingers trembled slightly as he unfolded it. The paper made a soft sound in the silence. Christopher, if you're reading this, it means I finally found the courage to tell you the truth. His chest tightened immediately. For 8 years, I tried to do this on my own. I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want you to think I was coming after your money. Christopher closed his eyes for a brief second. Even now, she was protecting him. You were building your life. You looked happy. I didn't want to ruin that. He leaned back against the cold wall behind him. A quiet kind of pain settled deep inside his chest. He had spent years thinking he had won. But reading this, it didn't feel like winning anymore. Samantha is the best part of me. She's kind. She's strong. And she has your stubbornness. His eyes drifted toward the little girl sitting just a few feet away, quietly flipping through her notebook. She wasn't looking at him anymore. She was used to waiting. She's asked about you every day. That line, it broke something inside him. Every day. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to keep reading. A few months ago, I started getting tired. The doctors found something, a tumor on my heart. Christopher's breath caught. On my heart. The words felt heavy, cruel in a way that didn't seem fair. They said this surgery is my only chance. The hallway suddenly felt colder. Quieter. If something happens to me, she has no one else. Christopher's hand tightened around the paper. No one else. You're all she has. He looked up again. Samantha was still sitting there, small, quiet, alone, waiting, just like she had been her whole life. Please, don't let her grow up without someone who sees her. Christopher lowered the letter slowly. For a long moment, he didn't move, didn't speak, didn't think. Then he looked at Samantha. Really looked this time. And something inside him shifted. Not business. Not logic. Something deeper. Something human. Samantha, he said softly. She looked up. Are you hungry? She shrugged a little. I'm okay. I had a granola bar this morning. That answer, so casual, but it told him everything. A child sitting in a hospital for hours, with nothing but a granola bar. Christopher stood up immediately. Wait here, he said. I'll be right back. She nodded. Didn't question it. Didn't ask anything. He walked down the hallway, faster than usual, his thoughts racing. For the first time in years, money didn't matter. Meetings didn't matter. Nothing mattered except that little girl sitting alone in that chair. When he came back, he carried 2 sandwiches, 2 drinks, and a cookie. Samantha looked up as he approached. You came back, she said. Christopher felt something tighten in his chest again. Of course I did. He handed her the sandwich. She took it carefully. "Thank you." They sat there in silence for a moment. Then she took a small bite. Slow. Careful. Like she was trying to make it last. Christopher watched her. Every small movement. Every detail. Trying to make up for 8 years in a single moment. "Do you like burgers?" he asked gently. Her eyes lit up just a little. "I love them," she said. "My mom said we'd go to that big place with the red sign after she gets better." Christopher forced a small smile. "We'll go," he said. "I promise." Samantha didn't respond. She just nodded and took another bite. A quiet pause settled between them. Not uncomfortable. Just new. Then she looked at him again. "Do you really work in a tall building?" He nodded. "Yeah. 60 floors." Her eyes widened slightly. A doctor stepped out first, his blue scrubs wrinkled, his face drawn tight with exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that didn't come from long hours, but from carrying news that changed lives. Christopher stood up immediately. Samantha moved at the same time, her small hand instinctively reaching for his. He didn't even think about it. He just held it. Tight. "Mr. Hale?" the doctor asked, pulling down his mask. Christopher nodded, his voice low. "How is she?" The doctor exhaled slowly, like he was choosing his words carefully. "The surgery was complicated," he said. "We were able to remove the main mass, but her heart didn't respond the way we hoped. She's alive, but she's very weak." Alive. The word landed somewhere between relief and fear. Samantha squeezed his hand. "Can we see her?" Her voice was soft, but it carried something deeper now. The doctor looked at her, then back at Christopher. "For a few minutes," he said. "She's drifting in and out. It would be good for her to know you're here." Christopher nodded. He didn't trust his voice. They walked together down the hallway, Samantha's hand still wrapped in his. This time, it didn't feel strange. It felt right. The doors to the intensive care unit opened quietly. Everything inside was softer. Dim lights. Slow beeping sounds. The kind of silence that wasn't empty, just heavy. Christopher felt something shift in his chest as they walked past the glass rooms. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking ahead. He wasn't calculating. He was just present. They stopped at a door. Christopher hesitated. For a moment, his hand tightened slightly around Samantha's. Then he pushed it open. Hannah lay in the bed, surrounded by machines. Her skin was pale, almost translucent. Tubes, wires, monitors. All of it wrapped around her like something unnatural, something that didn't belong to the woman he remembered. She looked smaller. Fragile. Like life had quietly slipped out of her while he wasn't looking. Samantha didn't hesitate. She let go of his hand and rushed forward, climbing onto the small stool beside the bed. "Mom," she whispered, taking Hannah's hand carefully. "I'm here." Christopher stood frozen for a second. Then he stepped closer. Hannah's eyes fluttered open slowly. For a moment, they struggled to focus. Then they landed on Samantha. A faint smile touched her lips. "My brave girl," she whispered, her voice barely there. Samantha leaned closer, pressing her forehead gently against her mother's hand. "I brought him," she said softly. "Just like you said." Hannah's eyes shifted. And then they found Christopher. Time seemed to slow. Everything between them. All the years, all the distance, all the silence. It collapsed into that one look. He stepped closer. "Hannah," his voice broke slightly. "I'm here." Her hand moved weakly, reaching for him. He took it immediately. Her skin was cold. But her grip, it was still there. Still her. "You saw the letter?" she asked, her voice trembling between breaths. Christopher nodded. I saw everything, he said quietly. I didn't know. A faint shake of her head. I know, she whispered. I didn't tell you. There was no blame in her voice. No anger. Just truth. I thought I was protecting you, she continued slowly. From responsibility, from feeling trapped. Christopher felt something twist inside him. You weren't a burden, he said, his voice heavier now. You were the only thing that ever mattered. Hannah gave a weak, almost sad smile. We were young, she said. You had dreams, and I didn't want to be the reason you gave them up. Samantha looked between them, quiet, listening, understanding more than a child should. Christopher swallowed hard. I would have stayed, he said. If I had known, I would have. Hannah squeezed his hand gently, stopping him. Don't, she whispered. We can't live in what if. Her eyes drifted toward Samantha. She's what matters now. Christopher followed her gaze. Samantha was still holding her mother's hand, her small fingers wrapped around it like she was trying to keep her here. Hannah's voice softened even more. She's strong, she said. Stronger than me. Samantha shook her head quickly. No, Mom. Hannah smiled faintly. Yes, you are. Then she looked back at Christopher. She has your heart, she said, even if she doesn't know it yet. Christopher felt his chest tighten. I'll take care of her, he said, his voice steady now. I promise you, she won't be alone. Hannah's eyes searched his face. Not for words, for truth. When she found it, something in her expression eased. Thank you, she whispered. A tear slipped from the corner of her eye. I was so scared, she'd have no one. Christopher leaned closer. She has me, he said. From now on, she has me. Samantha looked at him then. Really looked at him. And for the first time, there was something different in her eyes. Not just curiosity. Something warmer. Something closer to trust. Hannah's breathing shifted suddenly. The steady rhythm of the machines changed. A sharper sound filled the room. A nurse rushed in, followed by another. We need to stabilize her, one of them said quickly. Christopher stepped back instinctively. Samantha held on tighter. Mom, she whispered, panic rising in her voice. Mom, I'm right here. Hannah's eyes flickered, trying to stay open. She looked at Samantha, then at Christopher. Something unspoken passed between them. Something final. The nurses gently pulled them back. Please, you need to step outside, one of them said. Christopher didn't argue. He picked Samantha up, holding her close as they moved into the hallway. Her arms wrapped tightly around his neck. Is she going to be okay? She asked, her voice breaking now. Christopher didn't answer. He couldn't. He just held her. Tighter. Inside the room, voices moved quickly. Machines beeped louder. Faster. Time stretched. Each second heavier than the last. Samantha buried her face into his shoulder. He could feel her shaking now. For the first time since he met her, she was scared. Really scared. Christopher closed his eyes briefly. For years, he had controlled everything. Every outcome. Every risk. Every move. But this was something he couldn't fix. And that realization, it broke something inside him. The door remained closed. The sounds inside continued. And Christopher stood there, holding his daughter, waiting for a moment that would change both their lives forever. The hallway felt like it had no air left in it. Christopher stood there, Samantha pressed tightly against him, her small fingers clutching the back of his coat like if she let go, everything would fall apart. The sounds inside the room kept rising, sharp, urgent, relentless. He could feel her breathing against his neck. Fast. Uneven. "Christopher," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Why are they taking so long?" He swallowed hard. "I don't know, Sam," he said softly. It was the first honest answer he had given all day, and somehow it felt heavier than any lie. Minutes passed. Or maybe it was seconds. Time didn't feel real anymore. Every tick stretched too long, every breath too short. Then suddenly, silence. The machines inside stopped making that frantic noise. The voices dropped. Everything slowed. Christopher's heart pounded harder. Not because of what he heard, but because of what he didn't. The door opened. A doctor stepped out again. This time, he didn't rush. He didn't speak right away. He just looked at them. And Christopher knew. Before a single word was said, he knew. Samantha pulled back slightly, her eyes searching the doctor's face. "Is my mom okay?" she asked. Her voice was so small, so fragile. The kind of voice that still believed things could be fixed. The doctor took a slow breath. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. That was it. 2 words. But they hit like everything breaking at once. Samantha froze. Her eyes didn't blink. Her body didn't move. For a second, it was like she didn't understand. Like her world hadn't caught up yet. Then her grip tightened. "No," she whispered. Christopher felt her fingers dig into him. "No, you said she was going to be okay." The doctor's expression softened, but it didn't change anything. "I'm so sorry," he repeated. And that's when it happened. The moment her world shattered. Samantha buried her face into Christopher's shoulder, and the sound that came out of her, it wasn't loud. It wasn't screaming. It was something quieter. Something deeper. The kind of cry that comes from a place words can't reach. Christopher held her. Tight. Tighter than he had ever held anything in his life. He didn't care who was watching. He didn't care where he was. All that mattered was this little girl breaking in his arms. "I want my mom," she sobbed softly. The words cut straight through him. "I know," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I know, Sam." But he couldn't fix it. For the first time in his life, there was no solution. No deal. No power. Just loss. Pure and final. He closed his eyes, pressing his cheek gently against her head. And for the first time in years, he let himself feel it too. The regret. The guilt. The pain of everything he had missed. And the unbearable truth that he was too late. Too late to fix the past. Too late to say everything he should have said. Too late to be there when it mattered most. Samantha's cries slowly softened, turning into quiet, broken breaths. Her body still shaking slightly. Christopher didn't move. He just held her, as if letting go would make it worse. Eventually, the doctor stepped closer again. "I'll give you a moment," he said gently. Christopher nodded, unable to speak. Time passed again. Slowly. Different now. He could feel Samantha's weight against him, lighter somehow, like something inside her had changed. She pulled back slightly, her face red, her eyes swollen. "Is she gone?" she asked. Christopher looked at her. At those eyes. The same eyes that had looked at him earlier with quiet strength. Now filled with something else. Fear. Loss. And a question that needed truth. He nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. Samantha didn't cry again. Not right away. She just stared at him, as if she was trying to understand what gone really meant. Then she leaned forward, wrapping her arms around him again. This time, tighter. Different. Not just holding on. Holding to him. Christopher placed his hand gently on the back of her head. "You're not alone," he said softly. "You hear me? You're not alone anymore." She didn't answer, but she didn't let go either. After a while, she pulled back again. "What happens now?" she asked. That question. Simple. But it carried everything. Christopher took a slow breath. He didn't have a plan. He didn't have a strategy. For once, he didn't know exactly what came next. But he knew one thing. He wasn't walking away. "Now," he said, his voice steady despite everything. "Now you come with me." Samantha looked at him carefully. Searching. "Where?" she asked. "Home," he replied. The word felt strange, but right. She hesitated. Just for a moment. Then, quietly, "Okay." It wasn't excitement. It wasn't happiness. It was acceptance. The kind that comes when there are no other choices left. Christopher gently wiped the tears from her cheeks. "I know this is a lot," he said. "And I know I'm new at this." A faint, sad smile touched his lips. "But I'm not going anywhere. I promise you that." Samantha studied his face. Long enough to see if there was doubt. Long enough to see if this was real. Then she nodded. A small step, but a real one. He stood up slowly, keeping her hand in his. And for the first time, it didn't feel unfamiliar. It felt like something that should have always been there. They walked down the hallway together, past the same doors, the same lights. But everything felt different now. Christopher stopped briefly at the reception desk, speaking quietly, signing forms, handling things he never imagined he would have to handle himself. Not like this. Not for her. Samantha stayed close. Silent. Watching. Waiting. When they finally stepped outside, the air felt colder. The sun was already starting to dip. The world kept moving. Cars passing. People talking. Life continuing like nothing had changed. But for them, everything had. Christopher opened the car door for her. She climbed in slowly, holding onto her pink backpack. He closed the door gently, then walked around to his side. As he started the engine, he glanced at her in the rearview mirror. She was looking out the window. Quiet. Still. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. She didn't turn. "I'm sad," she said. A pause. Then, "But I'm glad you came." Christopher's grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel. Those words, they meant more than anything he had ever earned in his life. He reached back, placing his hand over hers for a second. "I'm glad I came too," he said. And as the car pulled away from the hospital, Christopher Hale realized something he had never understood before. For the first time in his life, he wasn't driving toward success. He was driving toward responsibility, toward love, toward a life he didn't know how to live yet, but one he was finally ready to learn. Samantha leaned her head lightly against the window, her reflection faint in the glass. Christopher watched her for a moment, then looked back at the road. Ahead of them, the night was just beginning, and neither of them knew what tomorrow would ask from them. The drive felt longer than it should have, not because of the distance, but because of everything sitting between them. Samantha stayed quiet in the back seat, her small face turned toward the window, watching the city lights blur past like they didn't belong to her world. Christopher glanced at her again through the mirror. She hadn't cried in a while. That worried him more. Silence, he realized, could be louder than anything. He cleared his throat slightly. "If you get tired, you can sleep. It's okay." She shook her head. "I don't want to sleep," she said softly. He didn't ask why. Some part of him understood. Sleep meant letting go for a moment, And right now, she was holding on to everything she had left. They drove in silence after that. The city slowly faded behind them, replaced by quiet streets, larger houses, longer driveways. A different world. Christopher had built his life here. A place where everything was polished, controlled, perfect on the outside. But tonight, it felt different. Almost. As the car turned through the tall iron gates and rolled up the long driveway, Samantha leaned forward slightly. "Is this your house?" she asked. Christopher nodded. "It's home," he said, though the word didn't sound as solid as it should have. The house stood ahead of them, large and quiet, lights glowing softly against the night. To him, it had always been a symbol of success. To her, it probably looked like something else entirely. "Is it a castle?" she asked quietly. A faint, almost innocent curiosity in her voice. Christopher let out a small breath. "Something like that," he said. But inside, he felt something twist. Because castles were supposed to feel safe. And this place suddenly didn't. He parked the car and stepped out, walking around to open her door. She climbed down slowly, clutching her backpack tightly against her chest. For a moment, she just stood there, looking up at the house. Not excited. Not amazed. Just unsure. Christopher knelt down slightly beside her. "You don't have to be scared," he said gently. She didn't answer. But she moved closer to him. That was enough. He led her toward the front door, unlocking it and stepping inside. The foyer opened wide, quiet and spotless. Everything in its place. Everything untouched. A house that had never been lived in. Not really. Footsteps approached from inside. Margaret appeared, holding a silver tray, her expression shifting the moment she saw them. "Mr. Hale. I wasn't expecting." Her eyes landed on Samantha. And everything paused. Christopher took a slow breath. "Margaret, this is Samantha," he said. "My daughter." The words felt heavy, but real. Margaret blinked, clearly surprised. "Your daughter?" she repeated. Christopher nodded once. "I just found out." There was no need to explain more. Margaret's gaze softened almost immediately, her shock replaced by something warmer. She set the tray aside and stepped closer, lowering herself to Samantha's level. "Well, hello there," she said gently. "You must be very tired." Samantha looked at her, then back at Christopher. "Just checking." He gave her a small nod. "It's okay," he said. Samantha looked back at Margaret. "I'm a little tired," she admitted. Margaret smiled kindly. "How about we get you somewhere comfortable? A warm bed, maybe something to change into." Samantha hesitated for a second, then nodded. Christopher watched as Margaret reached out her hand. Samantha didn't take it, but she followed, step by step. Christopher stayed where he was, watching them walk up the staircase. The pink backpack stood out against everything around it. Bright. Out of place. Real. When they disappeared upstairs, the silence returned. He looked around slowly. The marble floors. The expensive artwork. The perfect furniture. All of it suddenly felt empty. He walked into his study, closing the door behind him. His phone lit up instantly. Missed calls. Messages. Voicemails. The world he had built, demanding his attention. He stared at it for a moment, then turned it face down. For once, it could wait. He sat down at his desk, leaning forward slightly, his hands resting against his face. Everything from the past few hours replayed in fragments. The phone call. The hospital. The letter. Samantha. Hannah. And the moment everything changed. He exhaled slowly. For the first time in years, he didn't feel in control. And strangely, that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing how much he had missed. A soft knock broke the silence. Christopher looked up. "Yeah." Margaret stepped inside quietly. "She's settled in," she said. "She didn't say much, but she's lying down." Christopher nodded. "Did she ask for anything?" Margaret hesitated slightly. "She asked if the light could stay on," she said gently, "and if her mom would be able to find her here." Christopher's chest tightened. For a moment, he couldn't respond. Margaret stepped a little closer. "She's a strong child," she added. "But she's carrying a lot." Christopher nodded slowly. "I know." There was a pause. Then Margaret spoke again, softer this time. "And you?" He let out a quiet breath. "I don't know what I'm doing," he admitted. "I've spent my whole life building things, controlling outcomes, and now—" His voice trailed off. Margaret placed a gentle hand on his arm. "You don't need to control this," she said. "You just need to be there." He looked at her. Simple words. But they felt heavier than anything else. After Margaret left, Christopher sat there for a while longer. Then he stood up. Slowly. He walked upstairs, his steps quieter than usual. When he reached the guest room, he paused outside the door. The light underneath was still on. He stood there for a moment, just listening. Silence. Then a faint sound. Soft movement. He knocked gently. "Sam?" he said. There was a small pause. Then her voice. "Yeah." He opened the door slowly. She was sitting up in the bed, wrapped in an oversized shirt, her pink backpack resting beside her. Her eyes met his. Still tired. Still hurting. But there was something else there now. Something fragile. Something new. "Can I sit?" he asked quietly. She nodded. Christopher stepped inside and sat down at the edge of the bed. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Samantha looked down at her hands. "Christopher," she said softly. He waited. She hesitated. Then looked up at him. "Are you really going to stay?" Christopher didn't answer right away. The question wasn't complicated, but it carried too much weight. He looked at her, really looked at her. A child who had just lost everything familiar. A child who had learned, too early, that people could disappear. And now she was asking him if he would too. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "I'm not going anywhere," he said quietly. Samantha's eyes searched his face. Not just listening, checking. People had told her things before. Promises, maybe. Words that didn't stay. "For real?" she asked. There was no challenge in her voice. Just fear. Christopher nodded. "For real," he said. "I should have been there a long time ago. I can't change that, but I can be here now." She held his gaze a second longer. Then she gave a small nod. Not full trust, but not doubt either. Something in between. "I didn't know if you'd want to," she said softly. "To stay." Christopher felt something tighten in his chest. "Why wouldn't I?" She shrugged a little, looking down at her hands. "My mom said you were important," she said. "Like, really important. Like a man who lives in tall buildings and makes big decisions." Christopher let out a quiet breath. "That's what I used to think mattered," he said. She looked back at him. "What do you think now?" He didn't hesitate this time. "You." The word hung in the air between them. Simple. Honest. Samantha blinked slowly, like she wasn't used to being the answer. She pulled her knees up slightly, hugging them. "My mom said you were a good man," she said. "Even if you weren't there." Christopher looked down for a moment. "I don't know if I've been a good man," he admitted. But I want to be one now. There was a quiet pause. Then Samantha reached for her backpack, pulling it closer. She unzipped it carefully and took out her notebook. I draw when I don't know what to say, she explained. Christopher gave a small nod. That makes sense. She flipped through a few pages, then stopped on one. It was the same drawing. The one from the hospital. Her and her mother. And that empty space beside them. She looked at it for a moment, then held it out toward him. I was thinking, she said slowly. Maybe someone goes there. Christopher felt his chest tighten again. Yeah? He said softly. Who? She didn't answer right away. Her pencil hovered over the page. Then she made a small mark. Careful. Slow. She started sketching. A figure. Tall. Standing beside the girl. Christopher watched quietly. Didn't interrupt. Didn't rush her. It wasn't perfect. The lines were a little uneven. The shape still forming. But it was clear what she was drawing. Him. She stopped after a moment and looked up. I'm not done yet, she said. I don't really know what you look like, all the way. Christopher let out a soft breath. That's okay, he said. We've got time. She nodded slightly. Then she placed the notebook beside her. Another quiet moment passed. Then she looked at him again. Christopher. Yeah. She hesitated, then asked very gently, Can I call you that, or should I call you something else? The question hit him deeper than anything else that night. It wasn't just about a name. It was about space. About belonging. About what he was to her. And what he was willing to become. Christopher shifted slightly, turning toward her more fully. You can call me whatever feels right, he said. She studied his face again. Long enough to make sure he meant it. Then she nodded once. Okay, she said. But she didn't choose a new word. Not yet. And he didn't push it. Some things couldn't be rushed. Some things had to grow. Samantha leaned back slowly against the pillows, her eyes growing heavier now. You can sleep, Christopher said softly. She shook her head a little. Will you stay until I fall asleep? That question came out smaller than the rest. More fragile. Christopher didn't hesitate. Of course, he said. He shifted slightly on the bed, sitting back more comfortably. Samantha adjusted under the blanket, her small hand resting near the edge. Not reaching for him. But not far either. He noticed. And after a moment, he placed his hand gently over hers. Not tight. Just enough. She didn't pull away. Her eyes closed slowly. Her breathing softened. And for the first time since he had met her, she looked like a child again. Not someone carrying the weight of loss. Just a little girl who needed someone to stay. Christopher sat there quietly, watching her, listening to the silence of the house. It wasn't the same silence as before. Before, it had been empty. Now, it was full of something else. Something alive. He glanced around the room. The soft light. The oversized bed. The pink backpack resting beside her. All of it felt different. Like the house itself was adjusting, making space for something it had never held before. Time passed slowly. Minutes, maybe longer. Samantha's breathing became steady. Deep. She was asleep. But Christopher didn't move. Not right away. He just sat there, holding her hand, as if letting go too soon might break something. Eventually, he leaned back slightly, careful not to wake her. His eyes drifted to the notebook still lying open beside her. The unfinished drawing. 3 figures now. A mother, a child, and a man, still being formed. Christopher stared at it for a long moment. Then quietly, almost to himself, "I'll get it right," he whispered. Not the drawing. The role. The responsibility. The life he had just stepped into. He stood up slowly, easing his hand away without waking her. For a second, her fingers shifted, like she felt it. But she stayed asleep. Christopher pulled the blanket up gently over her shoulder, then turned toward the door. Before leaving, he looked back one more time. At the little girl in the bed. At the space he had missed for 8 years. And the chance he had been given now. A second chance. He stepped out quietly, closing the door halfway. The hallway felt different. Not heavy anymore. Just quiet. He walked a few steps, then stopped. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He took it out. Dozens of messages. Calls. Urgent. Demanding. The life he had built, calling him back. He stared at the screen. Then slowly, he turned it off. Completely. And slipped it back into his pocket. For the first time in his life, he chose something else. He chose to stay. But as he stood there in the dim hallway, listening to the quiet breathing behind that door, a thought crept into his mind. Soft. Uncertain. Tomorrow, he would have to figure out how to be a father. And he had no idea where to begin. The house stayed quiet through the night. Christopher didn't go back to his room. He stayed in the hallway for a long time, then eventually moved to the chair just outside Samantha's door. Not because he had to. Because he wanted to be close. Close enough to hear if she called. Close enough to make sure she wasn't alone anymore. Morning came slowly. Soft light slipped through the windows, stretching across the polished floors that had never held this kind of weight before. Christopher was still sitting there when the door creaked open. Samantha stood in the doorway, her hair slightly messy, her oversized shirt slipping off one shoulder. She looked at him, surprised. "You didn't go to sleep?" she asked. Christopher shook his head lightly. "I was right here," he said. She looked at him for a moment, then stepped out into the hallway. "Why?" she asked. It wasn't suspicion. It was curiosity. Christopher stood up slowly. "Because I said I'd stay," he replied. She nodded, like she was still getting used to that. Promises being kept. Margaret's voice floated up from downstairs. "Breakfast is ready." Samantha glanced toward the staircase, then back at Christopher. "You coming?" she asked. That simple question. It meant more than anything. He gave a small smile. "Yeah," he said. "I'm coming." They walked downstairs together. Not hand in hand. Not yet. But side by side. Margaret had set the table. Pancakes. Fresh fruit. Warm milk. Simple things. But things that mattered. Samantha sat down quietly, picking up her fork. Christopher watched her for a second, then sat across from her. She ate slowly, carefully, the same way she had in the hospital. Like she had learned not to waste anything. Like every bite had value. Christopher leaned back slightly, studying her. "You like pancakes?" he asked. She nodded. "My mom used to make them," she said softly. There was no hesitation in her voice. No fear in saying it. Just memory. Christopher felt something shift again. "Maybe we can make them together sometime," he said. She looked up. "You know how to cook?" He let out a quiet breath. "Not really," he admitted. "But I can learn." A small pause. Then, "I can show you," she said. That was the first real offering she had made. Not just accepting him. Including him. Christopher smiled slightly. "I'd like that." After breakfast, the house didn't feel as empty. It still looked the same. Still carried the weight of everything it used to be. But now, there was movement, sound, life. Later that morning, Christopher stood in his study again. The same desk, the same view. But he wasn't the same man. His phone sat in front of him, turned off. For a long moment, he stared at it. Then finally, he turned it back on. Messages flooded in. Calls. Demands. Pressure. Everything pulling him back. He picked it up. Paused. Then made one call. Short. Clear. "I'm taking leave," he said. Indefinite. There was protest on the other end. Confusion. Shock. But Christopher didn't argue. "I have something more important now," he said. And then he ended the call. Just like that. No negotiation. No second thoughts. For the first time in his life, he chose something over everything else. When he walked back outside, Samantha was sitting in the garden, on a small bench, her notebook in her lap. Christopher walked over slowly and sat beside her. "I'm back," he said. She looked up. "You kept your promise again," she said. He nodded. "I'm going to keep doing that." She studied him for a second, then turned the notebook toward him. The drawing. It was finished now. 3 figures. A mother with a camera, a little girl, and a man, standing beside her. But there was something new. Something different. Above them, faint, soft lines. Another figure. Light. Almost like it was watching over them. Christopher's chest tightened. "That's her?" he asked quietly. Samantha nodded. "She's still with us," she said. Not as a question. As something she believed. Christopher looked at the drawing, then at her. And for the first time, he believed it too. Days turned into weeks. The house changed. Not in structure. In feeling. It wasn't perfect. There were hard nights. Moments when Samantha would wake up and call for her mother. Moments when Christopher didn't have the right words. Didn't know what to say. But he stayed. Every time. And slowly, that became enough. He learned things he had never thought about before. How to listen. How to sit in silence without trying to fix it. How to hold someone's pain without turning away. And Samantha. She changed too. She smiled more. Talked more. Laughed sometimes, soft at first, then real. The space between them began to close. Not all at once, but piece by piece. One afternoon, as they sat together in the garden again, Samantha leaned slightly against him. Not asking. Not unsure. Just comfortable. "Christopher," she said. "Yeah." She hesitated, then looked up at him. "Can I call you something else now?" His heart slowed for a second. "Of course," he said gently. She took a breath. Then, "Can I call you Dad?" The word settled into the air between them. Soft, but powerful. Christopher felt something inside him break and heal at the same time. He pulled her gently into a hug. "There's nothing in this world I'd rather hear," he said. She smiled against his shoulder. And in that moment, everything he had chased, everything he had built, everything he had believed mattered. It all faded. Because this was what mattered. The emotional peak of his life wasn't in a boardroom, or a deal, or a number on a screen. It was right here, in the arms of a little girl who finally felt like she wasn't alone. Seasons began to change. Time moved forward. But something stayed. A bond that had been broken before it even began. Now rebuilt with patience, with love, with presence. Christopher still had wealth. Still had power. But none of it defined him anymore. Because he had learned something no amount of money could ever buy. That being needed, being there, being someone's home. was worth more than everything else combined. And as he watched Samantha grow, laugh, and carry her mother's light forward, he understood the truth. That success isn't measured by what you gain, but by who you choose to stand beside when everything else falls away. If this story touched your heart, subscribe, and tell me, where are you watching from?